Welcome to the Foundation Thalie in virtual.
Hello, good evening, Natalie.
Really nice to meet you. You know, I had the chance to meet you in the Verbier Art Summit.
Yeah, I did not notice, I'm sorry, because it was virtual as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I think we're going to start. So it's 7. Good evening at all. Welcome to the Words of Makers Facing Ecological Emergency. Conversations through an artist and a scientist to shed light on the uncertain times we live in. I am Nathalie Guillot, founder of the Foundation Thalie, a multidisciplinary art foundation based in Brussels. The foundation aims at creating bridges between visual arts, creative writings, and societal issues through a programming of exhibition, monthly talks, and artistic and author residency. We need more than ever to make the words of those who create resonate and help us drawing new way of being in the world, which is why this series will welcome more and more international guests along the year, such as Rosella Biscotti, based in Belgium, and Malcolm Ferdinand on October 28, Antoine Fenoglio on November 18. Antoine Fenoglio is a designer and the founder of the agency The Sismo, and he will talk about the care design. And this English-speaking talks will be held by Stefano Vendranim. Bonsoir. Hi, Stefano. Stefano is a curator. He founded the Strata Collective, which organized, among other projects, Aparté, an annual contemporary art journey through Paris to link sustainable shops with committed young artists. So tonight we try to answer to these questions. What is the role, of the artist and the scientist in regard to the environmental issues we are all facing? How can we raise awareness, project new ways of creating and using existing resources? In other words, how to produce without destroying? And to talk about this, we are thrilled to give the voice of the Swiss artist, Claudia Comte. Good evening, Claudia.
Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Hello. Thanks to be with us tonight. And the doctor in ecology, Tom Battin.
Hello, good evening.
Hello, good evening, Tom. That Stefano will introduce in a minute. But as I remember, this conversation is live broadcast on our website and our Facebook page. Should you previously sign up to the webinar, do not hesitate to ask your questions and interact with our guests tonight at the end of this talk. Many thanks to Claudia and Tom for being with us. And thank you, Stefano. I will give you the floor. Thank you.
Very much, Natalie, and thank you
Natalie.
for all of you watching and listening. So I thought I'd start off just by introducing our two speakers today. So first of all, we have Claudia Comte. Claudia, you were born in Switzerland. You did your master's in arts and science at the Haute École Pédagogique des Arts Visuels in Lausanne. The natural environment and forests in particular are a common theme in your work. Ecologically sourced wood, often from sustainable forests, found in and around your hometown of Morges in Switzerland, has long represented your primary medium for creating site-specific installations that allow the public to encounter nature through art. You also create more minimalistic geometric paintings, that highlight the naturally occurring patterns found in nature, as well as referencing op art and pop art. And while, of course, very visually appealing, your work also has a serious undertone, which is to question the memory of material and their native ecosystem. So in this way, for instance, the wood that you use reminds us of the forest ecosystem and the climatic evolution of the planet. More recently, the ocean and marine life have become reoccurring subjects in your artistic practice, such as in your recent solo exhibition, Claudia Comte After Nature, which took place earlier this year at the Musée Thyssen-Bornemisza in Madrid. and the displayed works were the result of your experiences and findings during a residency in 2019-2020 in Jamaica, organized by the TBA 21 Academy in collaboration with the Alligator Head Foundation, a scientific organization dedicated to marine preservation. Finally, you're represented also by Koenig Gallery and Gladstone Gallery, and you live just outside Basel, where you exhibited work just last week, in fact, for the Parcours, the off-site program of Art Basel Basel. I think I've said, recapped everything.
Thank you.
Tom, thank you for joining us as well. Tom Battin, you have a doctorate in ecology. You're a professor of environmental science at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, specialized in aquatic ecosystems. In particular, your research has contributed to the present-day knowledge that inland waters such as streams and rivers are major contributors to the global carbon cycle. And today you lead the large-scale research program, Vanishing Glaciers, What Else Beside Water is Lost, supported by the NOMIS Foundation, which seeks to understand more about the hidden microbial life in the world's glacier streams. And besides your work as a researcher, you're also a photographer, and you take black and white photography of natural phenomena, essentially around the idea of transitions, which we look forward to hearing about later as well.
Thank you.
So to start off, Claudia, I wanted to ask you about this expedition. Well, we just talked about your show at the Museum of Thyssen-Bornemisza in Madrid. Could you tell us a little bit about this exhibition that you undertook before making that work, that was led by the curator Chus Martinez, and that was first you did a residency, as I understood, first you did an expedition to New Zealand, and then you did a residency in Jamaica, where there is the Alligator Head Foundation, which works particularly with coral preservation, and for which you ended up creating an amazing underwater sculpture park, which will show some images. Could you tell us a little bit how you got involved in this project?
Yes, sure. So this is more than 3 years long project I've been working with this foundation called TBA that supports contemporary art, and that is now since more than 10 years for TBA 21 Academy, focused on ocean conservation and merging art and science, and giving the possibility to artists to meet scientists. And in my case, yeah, as you said, it started for me with an expedition in New Zealand in March 2018 or 19. And following that, I've been invited by TBA 21 Academy to do a residency in Jamaica to work closely with a foundation called Alligator's Head. And Alligator's Head Foundation is a marine lab, a fish sanctuary, and a coral nursery. And they have marine biologists to take care of the lab and the nursery. And it was just a really incredible experience for me, as I spent time with the marine biologists. I went to dive with them. I learned about corals, and I had previously a project that led to me there, which was to produce chainsaw sculpture. This is one of the core of my practice, working with wood, picking up my chainsaw, creating sculptures, and I have been doing for a few years those signature of mine, which is the cactus. And after this came into play, like doing a group of coral while I was in Jamaica. And so I produced for a bit more than 2 months with the help of my team, and mixing team with people on site, wood carvers, and yeah, people that I could find there. We did the big group of wood sculptures, coral type of shape, and I think I really wanted to leave something behind. So in return, we started to do underwater sculpture park based on those cacti of mine, based on the wood shape. So it works like that I'm doing the wood with the chainsaw, and then I 3D scan it's funny now, I see myself. I 3D scan the sculptures, and from the 3D scan, I can reproduce the shape into marble, bronze, ceramic. Those are the other material I'm working with. But in this case, they were made into a concrete that was that is strong enough to resist to salty water. And now we started with 3 sculptures underwater, so the images you have shown previously. And we are at the moment looking for funds to implement the 3 next, and later on the 3 next, to have the complete family of 9 cacti. And so what's interesting for me is obviously to create this clash between having this image of the cactus, which potentially could represent the future of our planet with global warming and the dryness that is starting to occur, and mixing them with marine life and ocean and this water surrounding them. And so it creates a strong image that speaks for itself, and at the same time it permits the lab to grow smaller corals, like baby corals, that are then applying on the sculptures. So we started this as well, and it started to grow around the sculptures. And obviously, once you have more corals, there is more biodiversity and more fish, and the biomass gets bigger. And so it acts as kind of a two message, like for nature, but about nature as well.
Thank you. Yeah, what I immediately noticed was that this cactus image or sculpture that you make a lot in your work kind of took on a really strong new meaning in its new context, which was underwater. And at the same time, it was amazing that you managed to create artwork that actually had a real impact as well on its surrounding ecosystem. I don't know if that's something that you've done before, or was that the first time? And what was that experience like? How did you come to that?
Well, it was the most incredible installation I have done so far, that's for sure, because I had a team, or we had a team of tech divers that were installing the piece underwater, and I have been installing a lot of sculpture in my life, but at 10 meters depth, obviously, you know, everything's changed, and they were drilling into the seabed to have the sculptures installed very strongly underwater. We obviously chose a path or a space where there is not so much current, but there is always current. So it was very impressive to be there for the installation and see those guys installing the piece. And what is really great with the project is that it permits the foundation to bring people, to create awareness. If you don't scuba dive, you can do snorkel, obviously. It's not so deep, it's 10 meters, so you can always see them. And if you really don't swim, they have a glass bottom boat, so they can always show. So it brings this discussion around them, which is so important.
I imagine you never thought you'd do an exhibition for scuba divers, but the visual is so strong. I think it serves as a metaphor much more widely for a much wider audience. It's very, very strong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, you rather than using your usual wood, which you also did, these particular sculptures were in concrete because it enables coral to grow upon them. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, now the marine biologists take a lot of care on them. They are cleaning them from the algae. If there's too much algae, the corals are not sticking on the surface so well. So this was at the very beginning, actually, this image you are showing now. But now we have quite a bit of coral all around already. It's really nice to see. And so now I can't wait to implement the 3 next, which I hope will be in a few months.
We look forward to that. I read recently, I mean, we probably most of us have seen Chasing Corals. We know a lot about the kind of the problems about the corals are facing at the moment. A quarter of the marine life really depend on coral. And I read in The Guardian recently that they said there was a report that world coral reef cover has halved since the 1950s. That's because of global warming, because of overfishing, because of pollution, because of habitat destruction. And a lot of that is happening in the Caribbean, such as in Jamaica, where you did your residency. I wanted to ask Tom a bit of the scientific angle behind this. You've done a lot of research around particularly the carbon cycle. Could you tell us about the importance of these coral and marine ecosystems for our planet's survival, as well as some of the other things that you've researched?
Sure, thank you. So we got some clues already from Claudia, and what I like a lot with your work, Claudia, is your kind of ambition or attempt to kind of sculpture coral-like structures from wood. And basically coral reefs, they are the woods, or they are the forests in the ocean, right? So this is a very nice bridge here. And so by being the forests in the ocean, besides, like, for instance, the kelp forests, they confer lots of physical structure to an otherwise poorly structured water environment, right? And by conferring lots of structure, they kind of provide lots of habitats to various organisms, and Claudia mentioned fish also. So that's one of the reasons why corals are typically, whether they are in warm water or deep cold water, for instance, well hidden, corals are hotspots of biodiversity. So wherever we have these hotspots of biodiversity, this does also have major implications for fisheries, right? So coral reefs do have a very important socio-economical component, right? Given that they harbor all this rich life, including microorganisms that I am particularly interested in, and they develop fantastic mutual relationships or symbiosis, corals together with microbes, etc., etc. These ecosystems, as such, they are quite important for the cycling of carbon and the cycling of nutrients. There's yet another important aspect with coral reefs, the fact that they can form these massive structures over thousands of years, or 100, or way more even, right? So they kind of protect, or they shelter the shoreline or land from the energy that comes along with the ocean. So whenever you have like heavy storm events and waves, they break the waves literally, and thereby kind of protecting the shoreline. So that's a very important function that we can attribute to the corals as well. So overall, the corals and or the coral reefs and the ocean, amongst others, because of their size and then because of all that humongous biodiversity that they harbor, they are indeed important for global carbon cycling. So talking about all the algae, so that Claudia just mentioned, right? So it's the algae that kind of sequester the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So the ocean is a major sink for carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And so we all know that we are living in a climate crisis, and because of us humans, so producing lots and lots of carbon dioxide that we emit into the atmosphere. And so more and more of this carbon dioxide enters the ocean. And one of the consequences of this is that it leads to what we call an acidification of the water. The water becomes more acid. And this is extremely detrimental for corals. right? Because if you take some corals and you put them overnight in vinegar, right, the day after they may have disappeared completely. So it's this kind of acidification that is very detrimental to coral, and that's something that we observe worldwide in the oceans, and so not only for corals, but also for small microbial organisms that have this kind of what we call mineral shells, basically, right? So they also kind of suffer heavily from the acidification, right? So talking about the ocean, and then like myself, I'm not an oceanographer. I work, as you mentioned before, Stefano, I work on freshwater ecosystems, and here above all on streams and rivers. And again, here streams and rivers that kind of drain high mountain catchment, right? Why is that important? So it's only since like 10 years or something like this that we now understand that streams and rivers worldwide, also lakes, if you want, they emit per year as much carbon dioxide to the atmosphere as at the same time the oceans worldwide sequester from the atmosphere, right? So these are similar carbon fluxes, although in opposite directions. So, but this tells us today that yes, indeed, and that's relatively new actually, right, that the inland water, so streams, rivers, and lakes, they matter as much for the global carbon cycle as the oceans, for instance. So what is important here also is to understand that we're talking about one hydrological cycle, but we're also talking about one carbon cycle that does include or that does involve not only the ocean, but also streams and rivers, but also terrestrial ecosystems. When we change the terrestrial ecosystem, this does change the carbon cycle in streams and rivers, and this again has repercussions on what is happening in the ocean. So it's all connected. I think it's all connected, and that's very important to understand if we want to kind of, if we want to face the crisis of climate change. It's all connected.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think that's a really important message there. I think we're often focusing on one part of the system overall, aren't we? We focus on perhaps the glaciers, or perhaps the, agriculture, perhaps it's the ocean, and in fact, like you say,
absolutely.
The whole. Claudia, to go back to you, and then we'll come back to Tom as well on the same topic. But you've collaborated a lot with. It's not the first time you've collaborated with scientists in your past. You also, in 2015, in Russia, you worked with the Institute of Plant and Animal Ecology of the Ural Division of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Very long Soviet name, I imagine. And now, more recently, of course, you had this project where you worked with a lot of marine biologists on the project in Jamaica, and before that in New Zealand. What do you think for you is the potential of bringing together these two distinct practices, one artistic and one scientific?
I think it's very much about visibility and connection. Artists are here to deliver a message, or the message of science in a visual way, or in a metaphorical or poetical way that somehow goes beyond the language. So that's what artists do, but they also speak of the matters of our time, obviously. So I think it's a beautiful way of putting together two fields, because often artists, they don't have the knowledge or need the scientists have to work on this or that subject. And artists, I guess, are able to reinterpret scientist information. So there is maybe kind of leveling or humanizing of the often like rather opaque nature of scientist text. So I think it's a great way to put both fields together, although they are very much not alike from at first sight.
And personally, what have you learned from? Have you learned anything in particular from these experiences? Could you tell us an example of something that really opened your eyes or taught you something that was incredibly powerful in working with scientists in the past? Do you have any example in particular?
Sorry, from example from past experience.
Yeah, something that you learned in particular.
I mean, yeah, I think I've learned so many things, but with the dendrochronologist, which is the scientist that that recreate climate looking at the ring of the trees. I think I was so incredibly surprised that those scientists can tell you with an extreme accuracy that maybe in minus 5,442, there were a volcano erupting in this region, and it caused this or that disaster, and that's why people had to, this tribe had to move from this point to another. And so it was just incredible to understand that from wood, from the data that are still inside the wood, we can understand about the human history. So it's like discoveries that that surprise me, yeah, that are on an everyday basis just incredible to find out. And I'm still in connection with the dendrochronologist from Zurich, and they give me sometimes very old wood that lived a few thousand years ago. Actually, right now my computer is on a an oak tree that is more than 6,000 years that they dated, and they only need a little slide of it to look at the microscope or to analyze, and then they have all this wood that they don't use, which has an incredible value for me, obviously, because it has all this history inside. And it's obviously such a privilege to be able to work with such a material. And so they called me then to see if I would be interested to get some. And what is even more amazing is that since they are scientists and they cannot accept money, we do other trades. So I usually give them schnapps or things like that, which is also very nice as a trade.
Fantastic. Tom, so is that how you often work with artists as well? Do you often work in exchange for schnapps?
Well, not yet, but it's good to learn that, Claudia. So I will come back to that. So I like, as a scientist, right? I got exposed to art, and then I started working across the boundaries between science and art quite some years ago, when I was a visiting professor at the University of Applied Art in Vienna. That was a fantastic experience for me. So there were even students from the University of Applied Art coming to my lab at that time at the University of Vienna to do their master degree with us, right? And so what I find so fascinating here is that, like, first of all, I'm having the feeling, or actually convinced, that scientists and artists, we have very similar ways to reflect on the world that is around us. So we have learned to kind of abstract observations and cast these observations then either in a piece of art or in a piece of science, right? So I think that indeed the kind of the process is quite comparable on both sides, right? And this is very important also, if we want to push frontiers, both in science and as in art. However, I also feel, and that's why I'm very much pleased to meet with Claudia again, very often scientists and artists, they don't speak the same language, right? And that makes life very complicated. And so then the dialogue is not constructive at all. And I do also think that, and Claudia evoked this already, that art can help scientists a lot to convey messages that are often very complex and difficult to get across, right? And here, so Claudia mentioned even, you know, like the poetic side of this, etc. And I think that this is very, very important. And especially facing the major crisis of climate change, I think that there are lots and lots of jobs to be done, both together for artists and scientists.
Thank you. And in particular, Tom, you're not only a scientist, but also an artist of some sort yourself. You're a photographer. Could you tell us a little bit about your photography work, and also what do you think that has brought to, is that brought anything to your scientific work as well?
Well, first of all, you know, I'm not a photographer it's not my job, right? It's my passion. So I'm a scientist. But yes, I fell in love with black and white photography. I mean, like, I don't know, 40 years ago, probably. And so I started pretty early, and I guess I was heavily inspired by my father, who at the time had a very, very skilled eye for black and white photography. And so today, doing mostly black and white, I'm thrilled by the fact or actually by the challenge to kind of capture the moment across different timescales, right? So right now I'm working on a series that I put together when I was on an expedition in Nepal early this year, and it took us something like 10 hours drive on the bus over bumpy roads, you know, to make something like 80 kilometers, right? So it was a long trip. And I had my camera with me, and I took quite some shots through the window of the bus that was completely covered with dust, etc. And, you know, so I have this kind of dust layer in front of my lens. And then as the landscape was passing by, right, I kind of tried to freeze moments. So the bus was moving and the people outside, they were moving as well. And at the same time, I'm having this dust and sometimes also these reflections, depending on how the light fell in my pictures. And that's something that I like a lot, actually. And so this is like, these are transitions for me, right? And so I've always been very much thrilled by these transitions. Also, like, for instance, another project that I have had is like, you know, we've been talking with Claudia quite a bit on the ocean now, right? So it's the surface of the ocean, right? The material or the matter remains unchanged, but it's the surface, the texture that is changing constantly, depending on the wind, depending on the light, right? And this is like the wind and the light, they are sculpturing the surface of the ocean. So this is highly interesting to me. And then, of course, also, and here comes then my job into the game, glaciers. So we work a lot on glaciers. And so we all know that glaciers are shrinking at rapid pace because of the climate change. So when glaciers, when this ice is melting, they form fantastic sculptures and beautiful sculptures, right? Or like geometries, patterns, etc. And I'm convinced that these patterns can be best captured with black and white photography. And that's where my heart as a photographer lies.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Do you think more generally, like, what do you think about how art can really bring to science? Do you think that there's a collaboration that should be increasing between the two? Do you think that that's possible? You work, obviously you're a professor. Is that something that you see more and more of?
Yes, I do, especially here. So I'm very privileged to be a professor at the École Polytechnique de Lausanne. And so today we had a guided tour through so we have like a pavilion or an art lab there. And so there's a fantastic show called Deepfakes going on right now. And so that's basically one that shows us how emanating new technologies, right? Or almost the technologies that will be available tomorrow, right? So how they can be used, right, to kind of enlighten the spirit of artists, right? And I think this is indeed a very fascinating emerging field between science and art. And so personally, I do have perhaps some concerns, right? I think, as long as the artist does not become a prisoner of the new technologies, right? It's fine. If art is just a mere product of the technology, then it becomes questionable to me. But yes, indeed, I do see like lots and lots of new avenues opening up for art, right? Embarking on new technologies, absolutely.
And Claudia, to respond to that, do you think that, do you agree with Tom that technology is perhaps very much affecting art today? Do you think it's a good or a bad thing? Tom, you had a particular question you wanted to ask Claudia, right? About.
Yeah, my question to Claudia, I basically asked it again, would it happen that an artist becomes completely dependent, right, on a given technology, and then kind of narrowing down her or his own creativity, right? So whether there is a danger that art becomes too much technology driven.
So in my case, I really use technology to expand my ideas, and I use it as a tool. And I really love to go oscillate between a very handcraft, very close to the material work, and then go through technology, and then finally sometimes going back to our natural world. Maybe I can give you a quick example. You see behind me a series of snakes here, and so the first one was the tall one here. I had done with my chainsaw about this size, a walnut sculpture made in one. I always work with one piece of trunk, so they are always one piece. And then I 3D scanned it. I have worked with the computer science department of the University of Freiburg that are developing softwares and program to create animations and to calculate, to work for medicine and robotic and meteorology. But they also developed, those softwares are also used by companies like Pixar. So they have been even working with animation companies like Pixar. And so it's also amazing to work with them, because I'm able to give them the scan of my chainsaw sculptures. In the case of the snake, it was a small piece that I could turn around myself. But if you see this one behind, which is a kind of a tall cactus, obviously I cannot turn it at my will and throw it around. And what is amazing going through the digital world is that I can transform those sculpture of mine, at least the shape, into something else. So I give them another life. And so in the case of these snakes, I created those 5 sculptures here from an animation of the same snake melting down, which was maybe a 3-second animation. And I extracted from the 100 more frames of this animation 5 frames, 5 images, where I created a 3D scan out of it. And I gave the 3D scan to a robot that, by a milling process, created the collapsing snakes. And this is fascinating for me, because that's not something I could think of, but this is not something the human brain can conceive. Yeah. Only the digital realm and a robot can exactly melt and squish this snakes since it has the same volume. And it was really a back and forth between the chainsaw, the digital world, and then back to the wood. And then it has been a tremendous amount of work to sand it down and polish it. So, so it's all shiny, as you can see behind me. And so, yeah, for me, it's really interesting. I'm using really technology in this sense to, yeah, to push forward my work.
Yeah. Stefano, can I add something to this?
Yeah, go ahead. I was thinking you probably had something to say.
Thank you very much. No, Claudia, so you mentioned transformation a couple of times, right? And so this is yet another connection between artists and scientists, right? Because you artists, you do transformative work as we scientists do, right? So good science should be transformative, right? So, and in the best of the worlds, as yours, you know, we hope that with our knowledge that we generate, we can contribute to positive transformation also of the society, right? So I think transformation is very important. And then, you know, seeing you with a chainsaw, etc. So it's important also when you transform the material, right? That, you know, you have to feel the material, you have to smell the material, you may even have to taste the material, etc. So I think that for an artist, this is, I mean, this connection to the raw material is very important. Then technology, the next step becomes the extension, right? And so I think this is a formidable way really to go, you know, from your way to really work or to transform the matter, right? To push it forward, right? Using technology, which you would need, otherwise you wouldn't have these results. Yeah. But it makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'd love to open up to the audience. We have one question already. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then we'll see if anyone in the audience, either on Zoom or Facebook, has anything they want to ask. So feel free to think of questions. We're talking kind of a nice segue onto talking about materials, and Claudia in particular. Wood, obviously, as you've mentioned, is something very important in your work. How did that begin? What is your relationship to this material?
To wood, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Swiss countryside, in the French part, close to Lausanne, just before the Jura starts. And I grew up in next to a really beautiful forest in a wood chalet. So it was a very idyllic childhood. It sounds a bit naive when I think about it, but yeah. So I've been surrounded by trees and woods all my childhood, spending an enormous amount of time outside in the forest, in the fields, etc. And so, yeah, I'm attached to this material since forever, really. And what I love about it is that it's still full of life. It represents the time that has passed. As everyone know, you can count the age of the tree looking at counting the rings. And that's, I guess, why I'm polishing so vividly on my sculptures, to reveal this life and the time that has passed, and the history of the tree in themselves, because everything is inscribed into those rings. A tree that grew up next to a river or next to other trees, or you know, in a harsh condition or not in a harsh condition, will have his rings that will be very tight or very opened. As we know, also there is those lines are formed by the spring wood and then the winter wood. So there is this kind of blood going around in the tree as well, and that makes it develop. And I'm just fascinated by trees for all those reasons. And I'm using wood for my sculptures, always from fallen trees. So it also takes me a lot of time to find the wood. Like in Jamaica, for example, I've been traveling beforehand to collect trunks that were laying around in the jungle. So at the beginning, I didn't even know what wood I was using. This photo you have shown before of the cacti, it took me 2 years to find the oak trees. since I needed really big diameters, and I didn't cut any trees for that. Now I just did a project for EPFL where Tom is teaching with many spruce trees, which in this case we cut from a sustainable forest. So in this case, when I need those long trunks for sometimes in my installation, I would always replant two. But for me, it's really important for the chainsaw sculpture to always know where the wood come from, why it has been cut sometimes many years ago, which is even better for me because the work on wood also needs a lot of time because the trunks needs to dry slowly, and I have this storage in the forest where I have my trunk laying down, and they are kind of still breathing and living in this sense that they are drying very slowly. Then I bring them, or I make the chainsaw sculptures outside and I bring them in the studio, and all that is a very long process.
I love to hear how you have such a kind of connection with the trees that you work with. I having grown up in big cities, you kind of end up often thinking, oh, these are trees or these are spruce trees, and actually every single tree has its own personality, its own nature. Like you say, you had to find a specific tree that you wanted to work with. It wasn't any tree that would do. So I think that's something also very important in what you say. We have a question from Axel, which is for Tom, I think. Maybe Claudia could answer it, but I think maybe it's more for Tom, which is why CO2 is taking from the air at sea level and vice versa with inland rivers?
So that's a pretty that's a good question, right? So basically, you know, so the Claudia's trees in the forest are my algae in the ocean or in the rivers, right? So the trees as the algae, they both produce the photosynthesis, right? And thereby producing the oxygen that we kind of breathe. So, and they rely on CO2 to do that, right? So like you have lots of forests in the woods, and like in 1 liter of water from the ocean, right? If it's like from the shallow ocean, you have probably thousands and thousands of small cells that you don't, algae that you don't see with the naked eye. And these algae, they kind of sequester enormous amounts of CO2 from the atmosphere that then diffuses into the seawater, and then like these algae, they can what we call assimilate that CO2. And something similar happens in rivers, but like in rivers and streams, it's rather the other way around. Streams and rivers, today we understand that they receive lots and lots of CO2 that is being produced in the soils, in the catchment. And so this CO2 is then being transported into the streams and in the rivers, and there is exactly the same effect as would you open a bottle of champagne, right? So there's like heavy, what we call outgassing of that CO2 from the streams and rivers, and then it's being released to the atmosphere. So that's why we have the other direction, basically. I hope that this does help with that question.
Very much. Thank you very much. And thank you, Axel, for your question.
I have sorry to interrupt, Stefano. I have a question for Tom. Thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear both of you. When you were talking about the way you're working together between you know, the artist and the scientist, how artists can transform visually the information of the scientist, and then sensibiliser the public. But we all know it's not enough, as we don't have the transformation in our society to educate and also to give some regulation from government. I just seen the documentary Cowspiracy. I think you've seen it as well, Tom?
No, I have not.
Well, I invite you to watch this documentary, which is quite frightful. I don't know if it exists this word, but it's really about the overfishing.
Okay, yeah.
Mainly over the overfishing and the dispersion of the, the biodiversity. And so I was wondering how come you, a scientist, has some connection and impact to the politic regulations in terms of, for example, this question of biodiversity. How do you collaborate with the policy government?
Well, I think one of the best examples is probably, again, coming back to climate change, right, is the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which we all know more or less. And so this is like the best scientists working on whatever, climate, right? And its various components such as whatever, hydrology, oceanography, etc. So they are forming this intergovernmental panel, and they do their science job, right? So what they do, they provide numbers, they provide models, and also like predictive models, so that they are able to kind of forecast our climate in 10 years from now, 20, 50 years from now, with certain uncertainties, etc. So, and they kind of hand over this to the politician, right? Or like, so science, what scientists can do, we hand over our knowledge to stakeholders, to various stakeholders and to politicians, right? But then what they do with this, that's a different story, right? And so it's like, okay, so it's like the scientists, right? And then like the decision takers, etc. But very often we do understand how the decision taking at the political levels, how that work or how it should work better, etc. And I think it would be very important in between to have like the tools of the artistic language, right? So that could better convey, perhaps, again, as Claudia said, in a poetic way, in a very provocative way, in a dramatic way, etc. The messages coming from scientists, so that that these messages better percolate into our society, and then in the society that there's a kind of a bottom-up effort, right, towards the politicians and stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And I think there the interface between science and art could greatly help to get our messages across.
Mm-hmm. And I was a former journalist and a publisher before launching this art foundation, and my passion is art, and I support artists because I love the artist and art, the art world, which is for me the last place where the people are really conscientized about the crisis. And also I'm a family shareholder of an international company called Decathlon. I don't know if you heard about this company. Decathlon, it's a retail store.
I know the yeah. Sorry, yeah, okay, yeah.
So I'm a member of the ecological transition.
Okay.
And we have a huge societal, we come back to the societal responsibility of the artists, of the scientists, of the policymakers. And I'm quite concerned about the lack of porosity between all the you see what I mean? And I'd like to do as a foundation and as an individual to act, to make some action, and to learn from you, Claudia, and to say, what can we do? Because we know that it's going to be very, very fast, very, very urgent to make some action. And I think also about the next generation. So it's also about education. So, for example, Claudia, was wondering how in your last project in Jamaica, you approach the pedagogical way of talking about that to young adults.
The educational aspects.
The lack of porosity of all the, the actors about this situation.
Yeah, in my case, well, now since a long time already, but every project I'm doing, I'm focusing on having a message and speaking about problem of our time, because what is the most scary part is I think people are not speaking enough of the problem. So, and to understand the problem, we have to speak about it. So what we have to do is obviously take action, but people are just sleepy, in my opinion, and you cannot take action if you are not aware of what's the problem really. So in the case of the Jamaican project, it's a way, like I was saying at the very beginning, it's a way for me to speak about the acidification of the ocean and huge loss of biodiversity underwater, as well as on our planet, on our land. And I'm living here in a house, so I'm trying to apply this way of living in my personal life and in the practice of my studio. I just acquired a property close to Basel in the countryside, which is a self-sustainable and self-sufficient house. That is, we have our own water source and we produce our own electricity. We have a septic tank. We are not connected at all with the village or any cities. And so everything that I'm producing with my team in the studio has to be done in a proper somehow ecological way, which means that we cannot use any toxic products, since everything would go then into the septic tank and would be disastrous for nature. So it's this whole environment I try to create around me, between my work and my personal life, to get to understand and to get to try to deliver a message. But you were asking what we have to do. I think there are so many things we can do. Well, first of all, being active, but on an everyday basis, I think eating less meat or eating no meat at all. You were speaking about Cowspiracy. Maybe you have seen the other one, the first one they have done. Cowspiracy. It's called Cowspiracy. We have just to mention the numbers they are bringing into those documentaries are quite wrong. But even though sometimes it's exaggerated, the truth is there, and animals are suffering tremendously. They are hidden from this whole. We are speaking about billions and billions of animals that we kill every year, that are producing an enormous amount of methane and CO2, and that are drinking so much water, that we are cutting so many forests to accommodate, to produce crops to feed them. And yeah, if people wonder what they can do, like right now, is really stop to eat meat, or eat less meat at least. The same goes for fish, and this is a very simple action that people can do every day. Besides this is really reduce our waste. We are so we should reduce our activities, be more conscious. We really live in a time of excess, and we should really be more aware of this era of consumerism. So yeah, that's why I did recently a whole group of cans out of marble that are enlarged 3 times. Also to have this message. As we know, aluminium takes hundreds of years to decompose. We find plastic and trash all over the ocean. Scientists says by 2050 there will be more plastic than fish, which is just incredible to hear. Even is it like it sounds like science fiction almost, but it's true, and it's what's happening, and it's disastrous really.
Stefano, okay, yeah. I stopped eating fish and meat last summer. I was diving with my daughter and didn't see any fish. It was in the Mediterranean Sea, so I was quite shocked. But the problem is, what do you tell to the pescatore? You said, okay, it's finished, you stop fishing. What is the economic alternative for all these people who depends on this activity?
No, you're right, but I guess it's not for everyone. There are some countries that that need fish. I think we don't need fish to live, you know. At least not in Switzerland. So I think also we have the luxury to have options and not necessarily have to eat meat and fish. So, but you're right. I'm not speaking for the entire planet, and some people depends on this food for their life. So there should be differences made.
Thank you. Stéphano, je te laisse la parole pour conclure.
Yeah, no, if Tom, do you briefly also have an action that you think we should all take away on a personal level, or is there anything that we can do?
I think it's pretty easy. We should all stay home and grow the veggies in our garden, such as Voltaire's Candide, his wife, and the philosopher Pangloss did after they traveled innumerable times around the world. I think that's the only thing that we can still do.
Anything more practical?
Oh, well, yeah, I'm completely. It's very difficult. It's very difficult, but I completely agree with what Claudia just said. I mean, you know, we overall we should kind of change our consumptive and resource-hungry behavior. That's the only thing that we can do. It's the only thing. And if like each of us, you know, I think it's pretty easy. If it's just about like fish and or meat eating, right? If we start reducing by half our meat consumption, all of us, that would be a great contribution already. A great contribution. And it's easy. It's very easy to do, actually. Very easy. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we should all make that effort. We have a couple of messages. Somebody says, there's so much to do that lots of people don't want to see how critical it is. And somebody else writes, I think the message is not to stop eating fish, but to eat sustainable fish. The world needs this form of protein, and there are millions of people who depend on fish for their livelihoods, as Natalie was saying.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And there are sustainable ways. There are sustainable ways for fisheries, right? The point is that we would have to decrease our demand for fish. And the problem with the fisheries is, you know, they go and fish what we call, well, whatever, the young fish, right? They should not catch the young fish or the small fish, right? Because by doing so, they change what we call the age structure of the fish populations, etc. And that's indeed detrimental to the fish populations, right? As it is with all the bycatch, right? So the bycatch is a major problem as well. So a sustainable way for fisheries would be to fish less, right? And to fish in more heterogeneously within the sea, so that the population can recover here and then it can recover here, etc., and do not overfish the youngest individuals within the populations, because this is what you want to fish and have on your plate the next month or 2 months later, right? So there are indeed ways to do that better, right?
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. I think that's food for thought to leave on. I think your talk has been very inspirational for all of our audience. To want to learn more about these issues, and as well as change our behaviors. So we've reached the end of time. So I want to thank you very, very much, Claudia. Thank you very, very much, Tom, as well, for being here, for sharing with us. Thank you to all of our audience. Thank you, Natalie and the Foundation, for organizing this talk. How should we look out for you? Is there any way that we should follow you, in particular, Tom and Claudia? Tom first. Is there anything that we should look out for?
I'm a scientist, right? We're publishing soon. There will be a major reportage in Figaro magazine. So if you want to read the Figaro magazine in October, you can read some of the stuff that we do. And otherwise, it's hardcore science, and we try to do some outreach. And so for Claudia, you have to read Les Alpes in November. There will be some stuff on the work as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot, Stefano. Thanks for the invitation, Natalie. I was happy to speak with you today. And for me, you can follow my activities through Instagram, or but now it's actually a good link. Now I'm opening an installation at EPFL where Tom is working next Thursday, where I created a kind of a forest of trees into the Rolex Learning Center. And so there will be this. I will be participating in Artissima with my gallery Koenig in Turin, and I'm preparing a big show at Haus Constructive in Zurich. So yeah, websites, social media, etc.
I will come to visit you, Claudia, to learn more about sustainability houses and how we can be auto-suffisant.
A pleasure to
Thank you so much to you too. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That was great. Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye. Ciao.
Bye, everyone.